When World War II began, Japan did not believe tanks would decide the war. While Europe prepared for armored duels, Japan prepared for jungles, mountains, and islands soaked in rain and blood. Their tanks were smaller, lighter, and underestimated, yet they rolled into China, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific years before the Allies were ready. These machines were not built to fight Shermans or Panthers. They were built to break infantry, crush resistance, and support relentless ground assaults. This is the complete story of every Japanese tank used in World War II, where they fought, and how many lives they changed forever. Type 89 Igo, 1929. Role: Infantry, support medium tank. Armament: 57 mm gun. Armor: up to 17 mm. Crew: 4. Key battles: Manchurian Incident, 1931. Shanghai, 1932. Second Sino-Japanese War, 1937 to 1945. Combat impact: The Type 89 was Japan's first true combat tank and saw extensive use in China. Chinese forces had almost no anti-tank weapons early on, allowing Type 89 units to dominate infantry positions. Estimated casualties: Historians estimate tens of thousands of Chinese infantry casualties occurred in operations where Type 89 tanks supported assaults, particularly during urban fighting in Shanghai and northern China. These casualties were the result of combined arms attacks, not the tank alone. Type 95 Hago, 1935. Role: Light tank for rapid infantry support. Armament: 37 mm gun. Armor: 6 to 12 mm. Crew: 3. Key battles: Kokkan Gol/Namenhan, 1939. Malaya Campaign, 1941. Philippines, 1941 to 1942. Guadalcanal, 1942. Combat impact: The Hago was fast and effective against poorly equipped troops, but catastrophically vulnerable to anti-tank rifles and cannons. At Kokkan Gol, Soviet BT-5 and BT-7 tanks destroyed Hago units in large numbers. Estimated casualties: In China and Southeast Asia, Hago supported operations that resulted in thousands of Allied and Chinese casualties. At Kokkan Gol, Japanese armored losses were severe, with hundreds of crew killed, showing the tank's weakness against modern armor. Type 97 Chiha, 1937. Role: Medium tank. Armament: 57 mm gun, later upgraded. Armor: up to 25 mm. Crew: 4. Key battles: China, late 1930s. Malaya. Philippines. Burma. Guadalcanal. Combat impact: The Chiha became Japan's most widely used tank. Early versions struggled against Allied armor, but infantry targets remained vulnerable. The tank excelled in jungle warfare, where heavy Allied tanks were difficult to deploy. Estimated casualties: In early Pacific campaigns, Chiha supported Japanese advances that caused thousands of Allied casualties, particularly British and American infantry caught without adequate anti-tank weapons. Type 97 Shinhodo, Chiha, 1942 upgrade. Role: Improved anti-tank medium tank. Armament: High-velocity 47 mm gun. Armor: 25 mm. Crew: 4. Key battles: Philippines, 1944. Leyte. Okinawa, limited use. Combat impact: The upgraded gun could penetrate early Shermans at close range, but numbers were limited. These tanks were often destroyed by air strikes before reaching combat. Estimated casualties: Shinhodo Chiha units inflicted localized Allied losses, especially in ambushes, but could not change the outcome of battles dominated by air and naval power. Type 1 Chihi, 1942. Role: Improved medium tank. Armament: 47 mm gun. Armor: up to 50 mm. Crew: 5. Key battles: Primarily stationed in Japan for homeland defense. Combat impact: Very few saw combat. Japan lacked fuel, transport, and time to deploy them effectively. Estimated casualties: Minimal battlefield impact due to limited deployment. Type 3 Chinu, 1943. Role: Anti-tank defense. Armament: 75 mm gun. Armor: 50 mm. Crew: 5. Key battles: never deployed overseas. Reserved for defense against an Allied invasion of Japan. Combat impact. The Chinook could penetrate Sherman armor, but arrived too late. Most never fired a shot in combat. Estimated casualties. None recorded in battlefield use Type 4 Chitu and Type 5 Chiri, late war. Role: heavy-medium tanks. Status: prototype/limited production. Combat impact. These tanks represented Japan's realization that their doctrine had failed, but Allied bombing and resource shortages ended production. Final historical truth. Japanese tanks in World War II are often remembered as weak, outdated, or inferior. This reputation, repeated endlessly in popular history, hides a far more complex and uncomfortable truth. Japanese tanks did not fail because their engineers were incompetent or because their crews lacked courage. They failed because they were designed for a war that no longer existed by the time it reached its peak. From the beginning, Japanese armored doctrine rejected the idea that tanks should fight other tanks. Unlike Germany, the Soviet Union, or later the United States, Japan viewed armor as an extension of infantry, not an independent striking force. Tanks were meant to suppress machine gun nests, break defensive lines, and terrify poorly equipped troops. In the early years of expansion across China and Southeast Asia, this doctrine worked. Enemy forces lacked anti-tank weapons, air cover, and armored resistance. In these conditions, Japanese tanks contributed to massive infantry casualties through direct fire support, shock effect, and psychological dominance. Most enemy deaths associated with Japanese tanks did not come from tank versus tank engagements. They came from combined assaults where tanks advanced alongside infantry, shelling defensive positions and forcing retreats. In China, Malaya, and the Philippines, this approach helped overwhelm defenders quickly. These successes reinforced Japanese confidence that heavy armor was unnecessary. But war evolves faster than doctrine. By 1942, the battlefield had transformed. Allied forces gained air superiority, deployed effective anti-tank weapons, and introduced medium tanks capable of absorbing punishment while delivering it back with overwhelming force. Japanese tanks, optimized for mobility and lightweight, became increasingly vulnerable. Thin armor that once allowed transport across jungles now meant instant destruction under aerial attack or artillery fire. Limited radios and poor coordination made armored maneuver nearly impossible against mechanized enemies. Japan recognized the problem. Designs like the Shinhodo Chihi, and Chinu show clear awareness that heavier armor and stronger guns were needed. These tanks were not crude or foolish designs. On paper, some could effectively engage Allied tanks at combat ranges. The tragedy is that Japan no longer had the resources, fuel, industrial capacity, or time to deploy them in meaningful numbers. Allied bombing strangled production. Naval losses made transport impossible. Air power erased mobility before tanks could even reach the battlefield. By the final years of the war, Japanese tanks were no longer instruments of offense. They became static defenses, buried in earth, used as immobile bunkers, or held in reserve for an invasion that never came. Crews often fought knowing they were outmatched, unsupported, and already doomed.